My father, Raymond Zinck, joined the RCMP in the early 1950s. His career began with a posting in Northern Labrador, where he served for several years before being transferred to St. John's, Newfoundland. After a couple of years in the capital, he was sent to Gander. It was there in the late 1950s that he met my mother, Beulah Zinck. In those days, joining the RCMP was no small feat, and the standards were very different. Applicants had to be male. Women were not permitted to serve in the RCMP until 1974. Since men were preferred, there was also strict requirements. You had to be Canadian citizen or a British subject between the ages of 19 and 28, at least 5 foot 8 inches tall, and your weight had to be proportional to your height. A minimum education of grade 10 was required, along with a thorough background check to ensure candidates had strong moral character. The RCMP at that time placed a heavy emphasis on integrity, discipline, and a deep sense of duty. When my father decided to propose to my mother, the process wasn't as straightforward as one might think. RCMP members in the 1950s had to obtain written permission from the commissioner before they could even get married. This was no mere formality. It required proof of financial stability and good character. Even the fiancée and sometimes her family underwent background checks to ensure the match wouldn't tarnish the RCMP's image. This is the letter that my dad wrote in 1959, asking the RCMP for permission to marry. Members also had to serve a probationary period, typically 5 years, before they were even eligible to marry. This ensured that a member's personal life wouldn't interfere with their duties or disrupt their regimented life expected in the force. What my mother may not have fully realized was that marrying my father also meant, in many ways, marrying the RCMP. While this wasn't officially part of the job, it was a reality for many wives. The RCMP had unspoken expectations for spouses, and their involvement in their husbands' careers was almost inevitable. Life as the wife of an RCMP member in the 1950s and 60s was no small undertaking. Frequent transfers were the norm. My parents were moved every 4 years and were stationed in various locations in Atlantic Canada, including St. Lawrence, Newfoundland, in the early 1960s, a small fishing village and mining town on the Burin Peninsula. Here the detachment included married living quarters above the office and even a jail cell in the basement. My mother was expected to handle many responsibilities, including feeding the prisoners detained in the basement, often dealing with individuals who had been arrested for disorderly conduct due to drunkenness or violence. My mom also did clerical work for the detachment, such as typing and filing and answering the phones even. RCMP wives had to be highly adaptable as their lives were deeply intertwined with their husband's work. They managed households through frequent moves, set up homes in isolated locations, and often had to shoulder the burden of raising children alone while their husbands were away on duty. Being a Mountie in those days meant long hours and sometimes no set schedule. The wives were also expected to represent the RCMP in the community, projecting an image of respectability and professionalism. When we lived in St. Lawrence, smuggling alcohol from nearby St. Pierre-Miquelon was a widespread and illegal practice. Fishermen would bring back tins of alcohol, bypassing high Canadian taxes, and sometimes cutting it into homemade liquor to sell for a profit. This activity not only kept RCMP officers busy, but also contributed to the drunken violence in the community. As the force was often called to respond to drunken fights and domestic disputes, with calls sometimes coming directly to my mother to send her husband into harm's way to help. In those days, there was no 911 system either. People who needed help either called the detachment directly or simply showed up at the house. This direct line to the RCMP often brought fear and uncertainty into our home, especially since there was a lot of animosity toward the RCMP in the area. My mom, with two small babies at home, often feared for our safety. She would answer calls that sometimes sent my father into dangerous situations. Imagine being the one to take the call that could lead to your husband being injured, or worse, killed in the line of duty. It was a heavy burden for someone who never officially joined the force, and my mother agonized over it daily. The RCMP detachment in St. Lawrence had its share of quirks and hazards too. In the basement, next to the cells, there was an evidence cage situated closely to the furnace. Among the evidence stored there were often tins of nearly pure alcohol, highly flammable, and a significant fire hazard. My parents often agonized over the potential risk. They knew that if a fire broke out, the prisoners locked in those cells would never get out alive. They also had two small babies to think about upstairs. It kept my mother up at night with worry. The dangers weren't limited to phone calls. There were times when people, beaten up to within an inch of their lives, would just show up at the house looking for the Mounties, only to stagger into the yard where my mother might be gardening. My parents' house was constantly under surveillance as well by people with questionable intentions, trying to figure out whether the Mountie was home or out on patrol before engaging in their illegal activity. My mom also spoke of the uneasy tension of living in a small community. She would often run into people or their relatives whom my father had arrested or had a violent altercation with just weeks before. The awkwardness of those encounters added to the strain of daily life. It wasn't just about staying at home and managing the household. My mom was deeply involved in my dad's duties in those days. She sometimes helped escort female prisoners or female mental patients with my dad to St. John's. In those days, transporting prisoners to St. John's was a long and grueling journey from St. Lawrence, and my mother would sometimes accompany my father on these trips when it included females, ensuring that the females felt safe and comfortable by having another woman present. Life as the wife of an RCMP member in a small community like St. Lawrence was far from easy. My mother didn't sign up for the RCMP, but she lived its challenges, fears, and responsibilities as much as my father did. In the 1950s and 60s, the wives of the RCMP members provided vital volunteer support to the force, particularly in smaller and remote communities. Although unofficial, their contributions were significant. They welcomed new families and hosted social events and organized functions to support RCMP initiatives. In smaller detachments, they offered practical help, such as assisting with administrative tasks, and as I've said, even feeding prisoners. They also upheld the RCMP's public image, acting as ambassadors through their involvement in community events and modeling the values of integrity and service. My mom, or to the locals, the Mountie's wife, started the first Girl Guide troop in St. Lawrence, Newfoundland in the early 1960s. Beyond this, members' wives provided emotional support to other RCMP families as well, especially during difficult times, and often helping each other with childcare, friendship, and basic support. Despite working within traditional gender roles, their efforts were crucial in strengthening the bond of members and the RCMP's connection to the communities they served. The Unpaid Second Man Award was created by the RCMP in 2010, with over 450 RCMP wives from across Canada having received the award that formally recognizes the role played by the spouses of RCMP officers throughout the 1950s, 60s, and even up to the 80s. To my knowledge, my mom never received this award, but I would hazard to guess there's a lot more women who actually deserve it. Though largely unrecognized, their legacy paved the way for future change, culminating in women officially joining the RCMP in 1974. The unpaid Mounties stand as a testament to the invaluable contributions of women behind the scenes during this era. We will likely never fully understand the true extent of the contributions made by the wives of RCMP members, let alone during the 50s and 60s. Their sacrifices, support, and behind-the-scenes efforts were woven so seamlessly into the fabric of their husbands' careers and community life that much of what they did went unrecognized and undocumented. From managing households under incredible stress to stepping into roles they never signed up for, their impact was immeasurable but often invisible. Their quiet strength and unwavering commitment remain a largely untold story, one that deserves our reflection, gratitude, and respect. Their sacrifices and dedication not only supported the RCMP, but also helped to shape the communities they served. Thank you for your invaluable legacy and for paving the way for future generations. Besides the actual photos, the images featured in this video were created using the DALL-E AI image generation tool. They are artistic representations and do not accurately reflect the RCMP uniform or other details of the 1960s era. These visuals are intended for illustrative or creative purposes only and should not be interpreted as historically or culturally accurate depictions. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that video. Check out the details below in the description. There's lots of information in there. And please leave me a comment. Leave me your thoughts. Love to hear from you guys. I always try to reply to everybody's comments. As well, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on the bell to get the notifications when a new video has been uploaded. As well, if you like this video, you'll find more just like it right here. And don't forget to head over to my website by clicking right there. Thanks for watching.